right in the middle of the day.
All right, let's go ahead and answer these review questions. So what is joint flexibility? What is joint flexibility? Cooper, what do you got?
Joint flexibility.
Yeah, what is joint flexibility?
It's the ability for a joint to move flexible extended in a certain amount of degrees.
Sure, I like that. That's very good. My definition is something exactly what Cooper's trying to get at. It's essentially what the joint is trying to accomplish through a range of motion. So really range of motion is really what Cooper is saying, just in a different way. And then how is this assessed? It's actually assessed in multiple ways. We're going to do one of the ways today. I think Cooper said it's measured in what? Degrees. One of the tools that people use is this guy. What is this called?
Goniometer.
Yeah, it's a goniometer. Hit it on the park back there, Michael. Good job. Yeah, so we use a goniometer to measure this. A couple of highlights when measuring joint range of motion when using a goniometer. Anatomical position is considered when all joints are at 0 degrees. And then when a joint moves throughout its range of motion, that would be the measurement from that initial 0 degree position. Okay? I'm going to skip to question 3 really quick. Someone is so excited about range of motion. You can hear it in the pencils. So the next question here, what are the factors that influence a joint's flexibility or an individual's range of motion? What would be one of the factors?
Gender.
Musculature. That's a huge one. Yeah, if your pythons are so big, like mine, it's really tough to wash your hair or shampoo in the morning. Or maybe your shirt's just type 1 too. Yeah, so if you have muscle bulk, things like that can influence range of motion, right? It doesn't have to be just muscle, it could be other forms of tissue, like fatty tissue. Another thing that is going to affect range of motion, another factor, is just going to be the structure of the joint itself, right? I mean, what does the range of motion for the upper body look like compared to, say, the hip joint? What's got more range of motion? Arm or hip? Arm, yeah. But look at the joint structure here in the arm, right? This is perfect. The architecture is beautifully set for creating a lot of range of motion as opposed to the hip, which is what type of joint? It's a ball and socket joint, right? That's going to limit our range of motion. What about the structure of the knee prevents it from going all sorts of which directions? It's a hinge joint, which is surrounded by what? Muscles and ligaments. I mean, it really does control, hey, if you move outside of this, something's got to tear. Right? That's why you guys get jobs later on, because something tears usually. Right? The last factor we'll talk about is the relative laxity or extensibility of the joint itself. And this is controlled by the contractile tissue itself. So those myosin and actin filaments that we've been talking about. Remember that length-tension relationship that we talked about. And it's also dictated by the extensibility of these elastic components in the muscle, the parallel elastic component and the series elastic component. That series elastic component is typically the tendon, right? So these are the 3 factors that, for this class, we'll say affect joint range of motion. Okay, let's step back and let's ask, what is the difference between static and dynamic flexibility? This is a little bit different than static and dynamic stretching that you might be familiar with. Okay, does anyone want to take a stab of what is static flexibility? How do we assess static flexibility?
Being able to hold a certain stretch.
Sure, that's actually right. It's actually range of motion that's achieved when you're assisted by, say, a practitioner, say an athletic trainer or a physical therapist. It's the range of motion that you can achieve when you have someone assisting you through that range of motion. It really helps take out the slack, if you will, of those elastic components within the musculotendon unit. Whereas dynamic flexibility that's different in that this is the range of motion that an individual can achieve when they're moving themselves through that range of motion. Okay? We're going to see the differences between these two in lab activity 1. Okay? Let's move on to the next question here. So what is passive insufficiency? What is passive insufficiency? Cody, you want to take a stab at it?
The muscle cannot be stretched enough to permit full range of motion at both joints at the same time.
Yeah. So a really important part that Michael just said is that we have a muscle that's going through multiple joints at the same time. And this causes, when one of those end of the joints is manipulated, we actually get a decrease in that other joint's range of motion. Okay? So what's happening here? So we've got this joint, or this muscle, if you will, that's attached at 2 joints. We've stretched it all the way out. Okay? And we pulled all the slack out of the series elastic component. So there's no more give within that muscle, or within the musculotendon unit. So we lose range of motion. Okay? We're going to get at this in lab activity 2 today. We've got a few demonstrations that we're going to work through. Okay, but is this something we've already seen in lab? Have we already seen this? Yeah, when did we see it? What?
When we did the hand dynamometer.
You're close, because that's a form of insufficiency, but that's called active insufficiency.
Oh.
So active insufficiency is when we get a reduction in force output because we've manipulated the joint. Okay, so you remember this, work with me now. Okay, if you ball up your hand in a neutral position, you can produce a lot of force, right? But if you manipulate that joint position, you try to produce force here, can you produce more or less? Less. Okay, now this is called active insufficiency. But there was another activity we did 2 labs ago where we saw passive insufficiency. Remember it? Remember this? When we saw, remember the flexors in the arm are connected to this wrist here. They're also connected to the fingers. What happened when we put our hand into an extended position? What happened to the fingers? Went to a flexed position. And this was because of passive insufficiency. These flexors were extended all the way out, and if these fingers wouldn't have flexed up here, we would have tore that muscle, or those ligaments, musculotendon unit. See ya, bye. Okay, so we've seen this before, but we're going to do a couple other demonstrations to see how the passive insufficiency can affect joint range of motion in today's lab. All right, take a minute with your team and briefly read through lab activities 1 and 2.